Welcome, everyone. It's fantastic to have you join us today for this webinar, Anatomy of Ransomware Attacks, Preventing Attacks on Your Backup Infrastructure. My name is Danny Allan. I'm the CTO here at Veeam+Observr, and I am delighted to be with you all. But maybe what I'd like to do is introduce the panelists that are with me here today. The first person I'd like to introduce is Guy Mizrahi from CyPROS. Guy, maybe you can just introduce yourself for the audience.
Hey guys, my name is Guy Mizrahi. I'm the CEO of CyPROS, which is a cybersecurity services company based in Israel, working around the world, considered one of the most known security researchers in Israel. That's it.
Excellent. Well, delighted to have you join us, Guy. I know that you have a depth of expertise that probably most of us only wish that we could have, so welcome. And I'd like to introduce as well Sagi Brody from Op9 Tech. Sagi, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Danny. Sagi Brody, I'm the CTO of Op9. I'm also a Veeam Vanguard and been around the BCDR space probably for almost as long as yourself, Danny.
Well, I don't know if it's been quite that long, but I don't know whether that's a compliment or not, but I'll take it as a compliment. We all actually, Sagi, Guy, and myself, all have a background in not only networking, but specifically security. And that's why we wanted to come to you today to talk about the anatomy of ransomware attacks and how they happen. But the expert on the line here, the expert on the panel is Guy. And Guy, maybe I'll start with you because you have done a lot of pen testing and forensics in your time. I know that you've worked in intelligence and doing a lot of security analysis. Maybe we can start with just having you share with the audience the types of organizations that you've worked with from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah, my background includes intelligence gathering and intelligence operations. So I'm familiar with the field both as an attacker and as a defender. Our clients comes from Fortune 500 companies around the world to even small startups. Most of them basically companies that want to improve their cybersecurity structure, the cybersecurity offering. Some of the cases are companies that develop products, want us to do all kind of security researches. So we do penetration testing, research services, architecture services, GRC consulting, even CISO as a service.
What is your favorite of those services? Use yourself personally. I'm just curious.
I've been breaking stuff for a living for more than 30 years. So this is basically what I love to do.
So based on that, what are the attack trends and changes that you've seen across those different types of organizations?
I think that the most important thing is automation of attacks. The tools, the systems that the attackers are using became much more sophisticated. They are automating a lot of the processes. So I think that one of the most important things is that from hackers that was working individually or maybe together as a team, now we have factories of attackers that are doing a lot of attacks together, very fast, very effective.
Yeah, it's certainly true that automation, everyone is talking about generative AI these days and leveraging automation and doing more. That is true in the white hat world, but it's also true very much in the black hat world as well. I think you would agree with that.
Yeah, of course. I think that one of the most important things that we all don't have is time. So whatever you can do in order to save time, you do it. And AI basically improved a lot in all of those things, both to the penetration testers and to black hat attackers.
And before we go into black hat attackers and how they have increase the level of sophistication. Maybe, Sagi, you can just touch on Opti9 and how you're using automation within your business. I know we didn't spend time on that up front, but maybe you can just touch on what you're doing at Opti9.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with Opti9, we are a managed cloud provider. We specialize in taking ownership and accountability and management and security of cloud environments, including public clouds and private clouds. We provide security for those environments. And a big part of our business, probably more than half these days, is managed backup and disaster recovery. We have a long history of working with Veeam. We're a Veeam Platinum service provider, a technology partner, and involved with many programs. Automation is certainly key to all of those. The only way that you'll be able to sort of do these things at scale and in a repeated fashion, and at 4 in the morning and at 2 in the afternoon, is if you create standardized ways to do them. In fact, I think that a lot of folks, and to echo what Guy said, folks think of automation as a way to sort of make your job be more efficient and go faster. But I think the security aspect of it gets lost on some folks to the extent that you automate something and have your technicians hitting a button to enact a workflow. It is going to be done the right way, the standardized way, the approved sanction way, secure way every time without having to worry. And that's really important to us since we're managing security for many customers.
Yeah, and it's true, as Guy said, that everything just becomes more complex, more sophisticated, more automated over time. So Guy, back to you. You touched on sophistication increasing. I guess I'm curious, can you give any examples to the folks on the call today where you've seen that increase in sophistication? To me, security was about finding a buffer overflow or SQL injection or whatever it happened to be. Do you have any examples that you can give around the increase or the more sophisticated malware that we're seeing today?
Yeah, of course. First of all, most of the malware today are, again, very sophisticated. They are searching for the crown jewels of the organization. One of those jewels are backups, because of the fact that when an attacker comes into the organization, he's basically trying to evade all kind of monitoring, but he knows that sometimes he will be caught. And the first thing that an incident response team will do is to look for backups, understand if systems can be restored. So some of the malware today in the last few years knows how to search for backups. The fact that it's very easy today to shut down some of those local backups using something like WMIC or even PowerShell gives you the ability to stop some of the local backups and APIs that allows you to stop some of the remote. So the malware today are looking for those kind of things, using multiple methods in order to find, stop the backups, and basically interfere with the incident response team that will come as soon as the organization will identify the attack.
Yeah, that is in alignment with the research that we have done here at Veeam+Observr, and you'll see this on the screen, I believe. But we did independent research of 1,200 organizations that were hit by ransomware specifically. So that wasn't, they might be, they actually were hit by ransomware. And one of the questions that we asked them was, did the malware or did the ransomware attack the backups? And in 93% of the time, it went after the backups. And the most frightening statistic of that to me was that 75% of the time, they were actually successful in some measure. In fact, 32% of the time they deleted all of the backups. So clearly using APIs and automation to make the results of their attack from the threat actor that much worse. Does that number surprise you, or it sounds like that's in line with what you're seeing?
I don't think that it surprised me. I do think that there are, some of those percentage are bad configuration of backups and so on and so on. But in most of the cases, yes, attacker will search for the backups, will try to stop or even manipulate the backup, maybe backup things that shouldn't be backed up in order to, increase the volume of the backup and see, in order that the CISO will see that everything is correct. But it doesn't surprise me that they are going after the backup. This is the first thing that an incident response team will check if the organization has good, solid backup that can be used to restore systems.
And Sagi, Opti9 provides managed backup services, and I assume this is, if this goes on, then your customers will call you and get on the phone with you. Tell me about examples that you've seen. Have you been seeing this uptick, and what happens with customers in that scenario?
We absolutely have. We have seen over the last few years an increase of customers calling us and saying things like, we have just been ransomwared, all of our local backups were also deleted, or it looks like the attacker has been in the environment for a while, disabled some jobs, waited for immutability to time out, then deleted. All sorts of different permutations. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're an attacker and your goal is to receive a payment, then you are going to do everything in your power to, sort of destroy any means of recovery. And so going after the backup environment first before you initiate the attack is just something that's logical, and it's just math, and it's just economics for the attackers. And so we really see the backup infrastructure these days as a new and emerging attack surface. It is an attack surface that, I don't think people have sort of thought about in the traditional way, and that needs to be protected in a unique way, specific to the fact that it's a backup environment. Things are constantly changing, and it's not just another normal IT asset.
New and emerging attack surface. I like that term, but I've also heard that there's nothing new under the sun, that everything is just a recreation of things that have happened in the past. So, Guy, I guess for you, is it fair to call the backup infrastructure a new and emerging attack surface? Is it like other attack surfaces? And if it is, how have those been dealt with? Like, are there things that we can learn from our past history to apply to this infrastructure?
First of all, I think that backups should be considered as a critical assets for the organization. It has all the information that is important to the organization. It has details about the infrastructure. It has all kind of configuration files that can help the attacker in order to do the lateral movement that he needs. So basically, this is a critical asset that needs to be considered as one. And one of the things that where, as a CISO, one of the things that you want is monitoring on those controls that you put on those critical assets. Most of the organization don't have any control on those backups, on those jobs that was created in order to do them. And I do think that this is a huge gap that most of the organization should solve. I think that the attack vector of backups is, it exists from basically 2017, 2018. So it's relatively new. It's not very new, but it's relatively new. But it's not solved in most of the organization, and this is what's important, because there are tools to solve this this huge problem, and most of the organization don't use them.
Yeah, that's certainly consistent with what I've seen, that we don't learn the lessons from past infrastructures and apply them to the new infrastructure. So walk us through, Guy, what does the anatomy of an attack look like? What happens when the attacker gets into the environment? What's the process from start to completion, or not completion? It's an ongoing thing, but what does that attack look like?
Yeah, so basically the attacker can be searching for assets. It may be known, maybe he already knew about a specific asset that you want to to go to in the organization, but it's more in most cases when the attacker don't know what there is in the organization, it's not an insider. So what he will do, he will search for the critical assets of the organization. He will operate all kinds of tools in order to understand how the network looks like and where are the critical assets in the network. He may search for an asset inventory system that may have all kind of information on the network. He may use other methods, and one of the things that he will find is the backup system. If he find one, he will do whatever he can in order to interfere or disable it. I will not work on all those details of how to do it, but he will try to do his best in order to stop the system from possible hacking interference in the near future. And then he will initiate the ransomware attack. If he don't find the backup environment, it's much easier. One thing that we need to remember that it's a timing game, and the more time that the attacker will be on our system and look for critical assets, look for backup, try to interfere with it, and so on, this gives us time to find out that there is an attack, to solve the problem, and to call the incident response team in order to block the attack. So the fact that we have backups that are configured good, that are working, and so on, and maybe even hard to manipulate, is one of the methods of delaying the attacker.
So you mentioned timing, and I agree that that's a critical factor. The longer they have, the more damage they can do, but also the greater opportunity to find them. What is the average dwell time, I think is the term that they use, but what is the average time? And do you have any examples, I guess, from your customer base?
Yeah, I have examples from, a few hours in very sophisticated organization to a few months in other types of organizations. I think that one of the things that surprised me when I was, a junior penetration tester a lot of years ago, is that I came to an organization and showed him that I found out that there are a lot of systems that are infected with viruses on the network. And the CISO told me, listen, Guy, we have about 200,000 systems in the organization. We know that in each time frame, something is infected and we live with it. And this has basically opened my eyes as an attacker to understand that maybe even when someone understands that there is an attack, I can still do all kinds of things. In most cases, what we see is few weeks to few months. So it's not very fast detection rate, even for organization that has EDR, MDR, SIEM, and whatever 3 or 4 letters controls that you put.
It's an important point. We have a SWAT team here at Veeam that helps with some of this within support. And most people are looking for their EDR and XDR and malware scanners to find it, but they don't realize that the attacker just got in through an open RDP channel, and then they're in there doing things that are not necessarily malicious in themselves for a period of time. And that can be concerning, especially depending on how long your backups are kept and are you protecting them appropriately. So Sagi, clearly an alarming trend. We're seeing this at Veeam, and security expert Guy is telling us that he's seeing the same thing. And I know at Opti9 that you've developed some technology, Observer, to help address this. How do you help address this issue of detection and knowing what's going on?
Yeah, so, we thought about this for a while as we would get calls from customers that would suffer, sort of cyber attacks. And we realized that if you can detect some of these activities that are occurring within the backup environment that we know that the attackers are doing prior to launching an actual ransomware attack, if we can detect some of what might look like an innocent change to a backup job, or a modification to a retention schedule, if we can detect those things that are occurring that are suspicious for a specific site, then and notify the customer, then we could potentially prevent a ransomware attack before it happens. And this is sort of how we do it here. And so let me just take a step back. Opti9 being a vendor that provides managed backup and managed disaster recovery as a service, we realized that a lot of our customers were calling us to consume backups and disaster recovery, partially to protect against the cybersecurity threat. But we realized in seeing these attacks that that's not enough. And people have a false sense of security when it comes to the state of their environment. Some folks will say, well, I have a DR site, so I'm good. If an attacker gets in, I could always fail over to DR. Or we have immutable backups, so we're okay. We don't have to worry about that. But what a lot of people don't realize is if an attacker gets into your backup tool, your data mover, and this is not vendor specific, it is an inherent problem that it's not a software problem. It's just IT. If an attacker gets in, once they're in that production software, they can destroy your DR site in seconds. There is no such thing as immutability for disaster recovery, and the attackers know this. They can get in, they can get into your data mover, they can destroy your DR site. Now it's gone. If they find immutability, which is seen from the local configuration, they can remove some of your critical servers from jobs. They can wait it out. So A, people have a false sense of security. And then B, if we can detect some of those things happening, we can prevent the attack before it starts. So what Observer is doing is we plug into Veeam. We connect directly to our customers' Veeam installs. This is done in an agentless fashion, doesn't require any specific special network configuration. And we are constantly monitoring the configuration. We're running the configuration through machine learning so that we understand what are normal changes for this particular organization's backup environment and what is anomalous or suspicious for them. And so if you, on average, maybe make a change to your backup jobs, 3 times a month, and maybe add or remove jobs, twice a week, we will look at the frequency and the types of activities, and we will basically say, hey, we think something suspicious is going on. And not only ransomware attacks or cybersecurity, but also malicious employees.
Yeah, we often forget about the malicious insider and the impact that a malicious insider can actually do within the organization. And you mentioned that there's not always alignment between the different groups, that they feel comfortable and confident that they're protected. But one of the things that we found in a recent survey on that security, on the ransomware trends report that we just launched, is that there is significant misalignment between the cyber teams and the backup teams. And interestingly, the cyber teams were more confident than the backup teams. But if you look across them all, one of the things that we have seen is that, the trend is 90% of them feel that an overhaul is needed, or there needs to be some change in communication. It was single digits that said, hey, we need little improvement in the alignment between our teams. And actually, if you pick in on some of those numbers, 17% of them said a complete overhaul is needed. In other words, it's not just that we have some lines of defense, we need to tear it all down and build it all over again. And so one of the benefits that you're describing to me, I believe, in what I'm hearing you say, is that it's bringing together two teams that historically have been disconnected, the data security team and the data protection team. So maybe, Sagi, if you could show us what this looks like. I'm a visual person, I like slides, but if you could show us within the product what it looks like to bring those teams together.
Yeah, let's do a demo of Observer and specifically try to answer that question of how do we sort of take backups and security, which have traditionally been separate sort of areas of ownership and separate teams, and bring them together. So So this is Observr. Observr is a SaaS. It's a SaaS platform. As I mentioned, it plugs right into Veeam. Takes 5 minutes to set up, and once it's plugged in, you'll start being able to see data in the portal. And here you can see some of the types of activities that we're looking for. And so jobs that are being modified, job definitions that are being changed, VMs being deleted, jobs being deleted, encryption being disabled, servers with all of their local or offsite backups deleted, suspicious changes to the incremental sizes, and all of that. All of those types of activities are being ran through our AI and ML engine in our cloud. And we're actually not even looking at any of the customer data. We're simply looking at the backup configurations. We're running it all through. And when we detect something that is suspicious, we basically create a threat event. And here you can see one during this time period. And when we drill down into a threat event, we can see all of the sort of incidents that occurred that made up that threat. In this case, this threat had a score of 99.9, which is very high. And we can see that Observr believes that there is suspicious activity because these types of things happened around the same time, and that's not normal for this site. There was encryption turned off for a server. Another server had its offsite backups deleted. Retention settings were modified. And it is difficult to sort of look at some of these things and say, what is normal? And what is normal? What was a just normal change or part of day-to-day, and what's suspicious? And that's the beauty of Observr, is it's by watching your site over a long periods of time, it understands that and can weed that out. And so here we can see all the incidents that contributed to this threat. We can also see, and this is where we get into security a little bit. We can see the MITRE attack framework mapping for this event. And we can also, like we see all the incidents here, we can actually drill down into a map of what happened when, and this is a sticks graph, a map of what happened when, what events, and what the remediations are. Now, for folks that don't have enough security, that maybe find security as a lagger, Observr is a great way to just plug it right into your Veeam, and you immediately have additional assurances and protection. And on the flip side, folks that have very mature security services or using MSSPs or internal security teams, I'll show you how they can plug all of this into their existing SIM, into their MDR, get it in front of their SOC analysts so that they can correlate what's happening within the backup environment and correlate that to what they see within the rest of the IT environment. Sometimes we show this to people and they say, hey, that's great that all these factors are making its way into the threat detection, but I'm the only one at my company that manages backups. If someone disables encryption, I want to know about it right away. And so, from here, they can enable immediate alerts to be sent. We also have reporting as well. What good are your backups if you don't have some servers that are protected or jobs are disabled? And so all of these types of reports can be sent. And then we also have remediation, where you can specify alerts to be sent to you based on how anomalous activities are. And we also have a cool feature where based on how suspicious or anomalous a threat is, we can automatically air gap your offsite backup and disaster recovery in response to these threats. And that can be done here with the slider or by hitting the big red scary button. And if you think about the fact that an attacker could destroy the DR site in seconds once they're into a data mover, being able to automatically air gap the DR site or building that capability into your incident response, could be the make or break for saving yourself. And so this is Observr, and again, it's designed to detect some of the changes that the attackers are making within the backup environment before they launch the actual attack. And so if we can see them disabling a job or disabling encryption, or maybe making a retention setting change, which might seem innocent on the surface. If we see those things that are not normal, we're not detecting security threats. We're detecting configuration changes that could be suspicious. Lastly, there's also an API, and you mentioned, how do we bridge the gap between the backup teams and security teams? And so if we think about the fact that the backup environment itself is an attack surface, and it's an attack surface that no security teams have any visibility into, because today the security tooling today does not have access to this types of data. Observer becomes the bridge. Security teams, the MSSPs, SIMs like Splunk can ingest all of the threats that we see, the incidents, the sticks data, and now those teams can see what's going on in the environment, correlate it to other potentially innocent activities, and also initiate the air gap as well. So we're kind of bridging that gap. Observer becomes the interface that traditional security teams use to monitor what's going on in the backup environment, and to interact with it. Now to show you one more thing here, we can even drill down on a per server basis and even do some forensics, so that we can detect what's happening for each individual server. And so here we can see if there was a change to the incremental backup size, the restore points, all that good stuff.
So who is the buyer for this, Sagi? I'm seeing here, it looks like the buyer for this, pardon me, would be the backup administrator, but that the APIs are the way to integrate it over and to bridge the gap to the security team. Is that a correct way of thinking of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think you can it could be one or the other. It could be the backup administrator that wants to ensure that their job is being done right, and they are just bolting this on. And one of the interesting things to consider about Observer is, we are on the outside looking in. This is a cloud-based SaaS platform, SLA-based. If something is misconfigured locally, if the server is down, if the mail server's drive is full and alerts can't go out, the backup tooling is just as good as its own internal capabilities. We are connecting the Veeam remotely, and we are sending out our own alerts. So here you can actually see RPO monitoring for individual workloads that you can configure, and these will be sent out regardless of what's going on with the local server. Obviously, if we can't connect to it, we don't have access to the data, but we will notify you and say, hey, we can't connect to it. And so I could see the backup administrator setting it up to provide additional assurances from a service provider, and then handing it over to the security administrators and say, hey, ingest these alerts and keep an eye on them as part of the SOC. And I could also see in reverse, the security administrators asking the backup admins to connect to it so that they have that visibility.
But I want to touch on the overlap potentially then with Veeam without getting into friction. But before I do that, actually, Guy, does this make sense to you? I know that you're deep in the security weeds. When you see this, is this something that would be of benefit to the teams or companies that you're working with on a regular basis?
Yeah, of course, because one of the major thing is that we want to see every event, every security event, and every event that created on our system. Then we can understand if we can correlate it to other events. I'm sure that we all can understand that if there is just a security breach, it's one case, but if there is a security breach that changes backups and so on, we understand that something is going to happen, and maybe something that involves data loss or maybe data theft. So, of course, that every information about those kind of systems that today in most of our organizations are unmonitored, it's an amazing addition of information that we can correlate and understand what is going to happen.
Yeah, and I know that we're always concerned about adding new tools increases the attack surface, but I think we entered into this relationship, am I correct, that you actually did a pen test on both Observer and Veeam software to to test this to make sure that it didn't introduce additional vulnerabilities. Is that correct?
Yes, we've done a big project on trying to understand vulnerabilities, holes. I think that one of the amazing things was the cooperation between the companies and the fast response to every finding that we had. We were very happy with the results.
Excellent. Well, Sagi, so I want to go back to as I'm looking at the product, I'm actually seeing some correlation, maybe is the right word, with what we're doing in Veeam.1. And I guess I'm curious how you see this. Is this competition to Veeam.1? Are you replacing it? Are you doing something different? Talk to me about where it fits within the ecosystem.
Sure. Well, I would say that it's not meant to replace Veeam.1 at all. It's really meant to be complementary. Observer is a strictly security-focused tool, and in order for it to provide value and function in the best possible way, it was designed purposely as a cloud-based service that sits outside of your local environment, pulls Veeam, and really stores data, stores what it sees within our own cloud. And so inherently, it's not part of the environment. It's not part of that sort of attack domain or surface, and it's completely segmented. And that is inherently different, I would say, from Veeam.1. Now, Veeam.1 is, certainly a great generalized, I think, IT tool. We use it here, but Observer only focuses on this specific use case, detecting an attacker who is making suspicious changes and notifying the administrators in advance. So the other thing too to keep in mind is Veeam.1 has a good amount of security tooling, but it's more so focused on the workload itself, right? If you have a VM and all of a sudden that VM starts doing funky things like its disk or CPU change rate increases dramatically, it will notify you. And that's what we refer to as sort of data plane monitoring. And this is, by the way, something that some of the other backup vendors are doing. They are detecting changes within the VMs. What we're focused on is the actual control plane, the backup environment itself, holistically, the entire backup infrastructure. And hopefully, by us being able to detect suspicious activity there, it doesn't make its way into the VM itself. Lastly, we're actually working with the Veeam.1 team. One of the things that Guy's company, CyPROS, did for us is they vetted all of this. They actually ran ransomware in VMs in an environment that was protected by Veeam and being monitored by Observer. And they gave us feedback. They vetted the workflow, and they actually looked at all the Veeam APIs and said, hey, why don't you also look at these other endpoints? This could also be indicators of suspicious activity. And they helped us kind of attribute weights to all those. And so now with the next version of Veeam.1, there's actually going to be a whole slew of additional security related data points that are also going to be ingested into Observer. And so it's really a better together message, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. We do. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say on this slide here, this is when, just to be clear, when it says Veeam with Op9 Observer versus competition, I think this competition is referring to Veeam's competition, right? Other backup vendors.
Yeah, I like this slide because it calls out that, it is a complementary solution versus other vendors who try to be all things to everyone. We see that regularly. Backup companies trying to also be storage companies, also trying to be security companies and zero trust companies and performance companies and whatever it may be, as opposed to partnerships like this. So Veeam.1, you're right, Sagi, we do focus, we have alerting in there on data change rates and CPU and memory, and obviously we have the ability to make things, immutable and to open them up and look for ransomware, but you're looking at more user behaviors as opposed to technology evaluations.
Yeah, and I would say the problem is, and what I think so. Veeam itself, I think, has a leg up on the competitors because Veeam itself is a separate component from the actual data mover. But if you look at what all the other vendors are doing, they're building monitoring and some ransomware related tooling into the product. The problem is the attackers know that. And why would you ever use a tool to tell you when that tool itself is no longer functioning properly or broken? All someone has to do is to shut down that backup appliance, disable a service, and you will no longer get those alerts. So again, Observer is sitting on so the fact that Observer is separate from Veeam is actually a huge advantage over, our backup, software can also send out security alerts. It just strategically, it is a much better strategy. We're sitting on the outside looking in, and we are monitoring if Veeam is changing and all of that. And then also the control plane monitoring obviously is unique. And the fact that we're doing our own threat detection gives you another layer of different types of security alerting. And so we like the strategy. In fact, we have a lot of customers that have Veeam today. They're backing up their data to AWS or Azure or Wasabi or a Veeam cloud provider like us. And, they just want to sleep better at night. And like I said, it takes a few minutes to plug it right in.
Yeah. So how long does it take you say a few minutes to plug it in? How long does it take to set up?
It literally takes about 5 minutes. And the reason is because we're leveraging a Veeam protocol called Cloud Connect, which was originally built as a secure channel to send backups and replicas, but we're just using that to pull the telemetry to hit the API. And so for a customer to add our credentials into their Veeam install takes 5 minutes, and then we usually ask them to wait a week so that we can collect data, have a baseline, and we'll do an onboarding call and help them configure all the alarms and alerts. And if they're using an MSSP, like a third-party provider, or if they have a SIM like Splunk, then we will do some additional work to help them integrate it with that. And if they want to make use of the automated air gap, then we will help them with that too. In the next version, we're actually going to have automated air gap support for AWS and Wasabi and generic webhooks. So should be fairly easy to plug it in.
Excellent. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that we got time for questions. And the first question actually, and by the way, so for everyone on the webinar, feel free to enter your questions and we'll try to go through them here. The first one, Sagi, is probably for you because it has to do with air gapping. And the question is, what are the best practices for implementing an air-gapped backup strategy to protect the data? I know at Veeam we talk a lot about immutable data, which we support, but what are the best practices for implementing an air-gapped strategy?
Well, unfortunately, what I'll say is that there's no, with all of security these days, and I'm sure Guy could talk about it much longer than myself, but there is no one strategy that sort of, makes you safe. And I think with backups, unfortunately, there's some really bad sort of messaging and assumptions out there that if you have immutable backups, you're good, you're done. You can move on to the next thing that you need to fix in your environment. Immutability is a great component. But like I said at the beginning, if you think about disaster recovery and replication, there is no immutability for it. It's just not possible. And so from an air gap perspective, our stance specifically to disaster recovery is, well, you can't air gap DR because you want the RPOs to be low. And so the trade-off that we found is this concept of an automated air gap in response to critical threats. Make that part of your incident response runbook. Do it to be prudent while you investigate. And then, once you have the all clear, bring it back up. Replication will catch up. Or if it is a true event, now you can use your DR site as an isolated recovery environment.
Excellent. There's a question in here, Guy, and maybe this is for you. It talks about in the event of a ransomware attack, what are the crucial steps organizations should do to recover from their backup infrastructure. But I want to expand beyond that because Veeam, we have a product called Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, which will automate the recovery of all the VMs and systems and data, and you can test that on an ongoing basis. But Guy, I guess I'm most interested, what about the things outside of the technology? What are I'm presuming you help customers with recovering from ransomware. Who are the groups that are involved with this, and what are the other things outside of just recovery of the technology systems?
Yeah, I think that, we're mostly focused on technology, but as an organization, we need to think about law implication, PR implications, and other implications. An IR team should arrive as soon as possible to the organization and basically manage the entire incident. There should be a team that includes technical guys, a negotiator that will speak with the ransomware group, because today most of the ransomware groups are communicating with their customers in order to help them solve the problem as fast as they can. So there should be a negotiator that knows how to speak the lingo, knows the players on the market, and has some kind of let's say reputation with them. A lawyer that can help you do all those things that involved on those fields. So basically, there is a team of at least 7 people that arrives to the organization, not including the technical staff that you need in order to, let's say, boost the operation of getting the organization technology running.
Yeah, that is why having a partner is so important in this. I have someone on my team, actually, they were hit by ransomware, or a customer was hit by ransomware, and their data center actually became a crime scene. And so they had to fail over to a separate location. We don't often think about that. What happens when your data center becomes a crime scene? And first of all, you have to fail over to a new location, but then you might need to fail back 2 months later. Those are things that most customers probably are not well prepared for within their organization.
I
have a question for you.
Sorry, I will also mention one thing, that there is some kind of conflict between law enforcement and agencies and the organization itself, which basically one of them want to get back to work as soon as possible, and one want to investigate as much as they can. So having your own incident response team, even if we go back, having your own disaster recovery plan, incident response plan, and then a team that can help you make everything faster is very crucial to the organization.
Yeah, so I just want to jump on that. I think that's such an important point, is that sometimes people don't understand the role of disaster recovery environments for ransomware and how it relates to backup. And I think the best example I've heard of that is the Colonial Pipeline ransomware from, I don't know, what, 2 years ago. I think the general perception of that event was that they didn't have backups, that a attacker initiated a ransomware attack. They didn't have their data, and now they were in a bind. The reality is they had full backups of their system. The question was, where do they restore those backups to? The only available place, because they didn't have a legitimate DR site, the only available place was to restore them back to production and override the attacked environment, which, like Guy is saying, wipes out the entire crime scene, and no one will ever know what happened. And so having that DR site, from a security perspective and an isolated recovery environment, if we want to use the Gartner terminology, is so important, for organizations.
Yeah, it's one of the parts that people don't often consider. They're doing their backups and they're doing all their proper testing, but they're not thinking about what it means, the long-term implications when you're hit. I have a question for you guys. It didn't come in the Q&A, but I've always been curious about this. Someone gets in and they attempt ransomware. They're not necessarily successful in it, or maybe they're successful encrypting the data, but you have the backups. The backups are immutable. You've done all the right things in your recovery. But in part of the attack, they exfiltrated and stole the data. So you have the data to recover, but they have also stolen the data and they're asking for the ransom. Would you pay it in that situation?
It depends on the country that you that you're working on, because some of the countries don't allow you to pay. Some of the insurance company will not allow you to pay. Some of them will force you to pay. So it's really difficult to answer. One of the things that we need to consider, that every time that there is an attacker in our systems, there might be a secondary extortion part of the attack. So basically, even if you got all the systems running and you are fully operational as fast as you can, a few days later or a few hours later, there will be another communication with the negotiator or maybe with you yourself that's saying, listen, everything is cool. You run your systems, but we got your data, so now you pay. This is very common. It happens all the time.
One of the things that I've been very adamant about is the importance of integrating data loss prevention and network monitoring in as part of the solution, because as you say, extortion is a separate type of attack, and all of these things come together. It's why, to Sagi's earlier point of bridging the gap between backup operations and the cyber teams is so important. Another question here, in the event of a ransomware attack, what are the crucial steps organizations should take to ensure recovery and restoration of their backup infrastructure? I think we've already answered that one.
I want to add one thing, that in a lot of the cases, the attackers own the administrator itself. So one of the most important things is that we need to understand that we ourselves as a security professional and IT professionals are one of the critical assets that the attackers are searching and trying to attack. And most of those security oriented guys that has a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience forget to change their credentials, and then the attackers, can smile again after you've done your part.
Yeah, it's credentials and credential escalation is probably the first step in most attacks, whether it be ransomware or just malware or penetration. Is that a true statement?
Yes, it's not just credentials. In some of the cases, it's crypt wallets that holds all kind of passwords. In some cases, it can be a login configuration files and so on. And we need to think about those things when we do all of our operations, when we handle those attacks.
Yeah, well, it's a scary landscape. I have a book here. This is how they tell me the world will end, because it doesn't seem to be getting better. And if I was to project out into the future, I foresee things getting a lot worse before they get better. And so it's why organizations like CyPROS and Opti9 and Veeam are partnering together to offer solutions. So before we close out, Sagi, maybe just last closing thoughts and comments to the audience.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you're running Veeam today or thinking about it, and you'd like to try out Observer, happy to give you a demo or a POC account. If you don't have a disaster recovery site or configuration, we can help you with that. We sell that as a service, and we're happy to talk about all things security and DR.
And Guy, maybe just over to you. Any closing comments or thoughts for the audience?
I think that we will love to help everyone to boost their cyber posture. We're very experienced in this field with the look of with the eyes of an attacker. So we will gladly help you guys.
Excellent. Well, for everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you come away with a few insights and a better understanding of the anatomy of a ransomware attack. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you.